I've been hosting yard sales every Saturday for the past 3 years, and what I discovered about one of my regular customers still makes me check my locks twice before bed. What started as innocent weekend sales to clear out my late mother's belongings turned into something that revealed just how dangerous the people walking through our neighborhoods really can be. My name is Sarah, and after my mother passed away in 2021, I inherited her house along with 50 years' worth of accumulated possessions. Rather than donate everything, I decided to hold weekly yard sales partly for the extra income, but mostly because it felt therapeutic to slowly let go of her things while meeting neighbors and sharing stories about the items. Every Saturday at 7 a.m. sharp, I'd set up tables in my driveway and front yard. The regulars started showing up pretty quickly. There's a whole community of yard sale enthusiasts who follow specific routes every weekend. There was Mrs. Chin, who collected vintage linens, Bob, who restored old tools, and then there was Marcus. Marcus appeared during my third week. Average height, maybe mid-40s, always wore the same worn baseball cap and carried a leather messenger bag. He was polite, soft-spoken, and had this way of examining items very carefully before purchasing. Unlike other customers who chatted about their finds or haggled over prices, Marcus was methodical. He'd arrive around 8:30, spend exactly 45 minutes browsing, make his purchases, and leave without much conversation. What made him memorable wasn't his quiet demeanor, it was what he bought. Marcus only purchased items that belonged to women. Not obviously feminine things like jewelry or clothes, but personal items. Reading glasses, coffee mugs with lipstick stains, worn paperback novels with handwritten notes in the margins, small mirrors, hairbrushes, even old prescription bottles with my mother's name still on them. At first, I assumed he was shopping for a wife or girlfriend. When I casually mentioned it during his fourth visit, asking if his wife enjoyed mysteries since he'd bought several of my mother's crime novels, his response made my skin crawl. "Oh, these aren't for anyone else," he said, carefully placing a ceramic mug that read, "World's Best Mom," into his bag. "I collect items with personal history. Things that carry the essence of their previous owners." I laughed it off as quirky collector behavior, but something in his tone bothered me. The way he said essence lingered in my mind long after he left. Over the following weeks, Marcus's purchases became more specific. He started asking about items before I even put them out for sale. "Did you find any more reading glasses this week? What about perfume bottles, even if they're empty?" He knew my mother's routine better than I did, mentioning that she must have enjoyed gardening because he noticed soil under the fingernails of some gloves he'd purchased. That observation stopped me cold. I'd never mentioned my mother's gardening hobby, and those gloves had been in a box in the basement. How could he know about soil under fingernails that I'd never noticed? The breaking point came during his 8th visit. I was reorganizing my mother's bedroom dresser when I found a small jewelry box tucked in the back of the bottom drawer. Inside were pieces I'd never seen: a pearl bracelet, some vintage brooches, and a delicate gold locket with my parents' wedding photo inside. When I brought the jewelry box outside, Marcus was there within minutes, like he'd been watching from his car. His eyes locked onto the locket immediately. "How much for the gold locket?" he asked, but his voice was different. "Hungry. Urgent. Actually, I think I'll keep that one," I replied. "It has my parents' photo inside." His entire demeanor changed. The polite facade cracked, revealing something cold underneath. "Everything has a price, Sarah. Your mother wouldn't want her things hoarded away in boxes where no one can appreciate them." The fact that he knew my name, when I never introduced myself, sent ice through my veins. I'd been wearing name tags during sales, but the way he said it felt too familiar, too possessive. "I'm sorry, but the locket isn't for sale," I said firmly. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, then smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "I understand. Some things are too personal to let go of. I respect that." He purchased a few other items and left, but something in his tone suggested this wasn't over. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching my house. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak of the old house settling made me jump. I found myself checking the locks repeatedly and closing all the curtains. Sunday morning, I discovered my garbage cans had been rifled through. Bags were torn open, contents scattered across my driveway. At first, I assumed it was raccoons, but the mess was too organized. Someone had been searching for something specific. Then I noticed my bedroom window screen had been cut. Not torn or damaged by weather, carefully cut in a straight line, just wide enough for someone to reach inside. My room faced the backyard, hidden from street view. If I hadn't been looking for signs of intrusion, I never would have noticed. I called the police, but without concrete evidence of theft or clear signs of forced entry, they could only file a report and recommend I install security cameras. Officer Martinez, who took my statement, was professional but clearly overwhelmed with more serious cases. "Has anything been stolen?" he asked. "Not that I can tell, but someone's been going through my garbage and possibly trying to get into my house. Any idea who might want to do this?" I hesitated, then told him about Marcus. As I described his behavior and purchases, I realized how it sounded. A customer buying items at yard sales wasn't exactly criminal activity. Officer Martinez took notes, but didn't seem particularly concerned. "Keep an eye out and call us if you see anyone suspicious around your property," he advised. "Maybe consider taking a break from the yard sales for a few weeks." But I couldn't stop. The sales had become my weekend routine, my way of processing grief and connecting with the community. Besides, if Marcus was watching my house, avoiding him wouldn't solve the problem. The next Saturday, Marcus didn't show up during his usual time slot. I felt relieved but also anxious. His absence somehow felt more threatening than his presence. Other regulars commented that they'd seen him at different sales throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Chin mentioned that Marcus had approached her about purchasing items from my sales secondhand. He asked if I'd ever bought anything from your yard sales that I might want to resell. Specifically asked about personal items, glasses, jewelry, photographs. Offered to pay twice what I'd paid you. Bob the tool collector had a similar story. Strange fellow came by my workshop asking about items from your mother's garage. Wanted to know if I'd found any personal effects mixed in with the tools. Offered good money for anything with initials or engraving. The pattern was becoming clear. Marcus wasn't just collecting random items from my sales, he was trying to acquire everything that had belonged to my mother. When he couldn't buy them directly from me, he was tracking them down through other customers. That realization led to a more disturbing thought. If Marcus was this obsessed with my mother's belongings, what did he know about my mother herself? I spent Sunday afternoon going through her personal papers more carefully than I had before. In a box of old correspondence, I found something that made my blood run cold: a handwritten note, dated just 3 months before my mother's death, tucked inside her address book. "If anything happens to me, check the blue folder in my bedroom closet. I think someone has been watching the house. Mom." I'd never found a blue folder, but her closet was still mostly packed with clothes I hadn't sorted through yet. Behind her winter coats, taped to the back wall, I discovered a manila envelope with "blue folder" written in my mother's handwriting. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, taken from inside our house, looking out at the street, the backyard, the driveway. They showed the same figure lurking at different times of day and night. A man in a baseball cap, carrying a messenger bag, standing behind trees, sitting in a parked car, walking slowly past our house. The photos were dated across several months leading up to my mother's death. Marcus had been stalking her long before I started having yard sales. At the bottom of the envelope was a typed note. "The man in these photos has been watching our house for weeks. He approaches neighbors asking questions about our family, our routine, when we're home. Mrs. Patterson next door said he asked specifically about items we might be throwing away or planning to donate. I think he's been going through our garbage. I've started keeping important documents in the bedroom safe. If you're reading this, please contact police and show them these photos. I'm scared but don't want to worry you if I'm wrong. Love, Mom." My hands were shaking as I realized the horrible truth. My mother had died of what appeared to be natural causes, a heart attack, in her sleep, but she'd been living in fear for months before her death. Had the stress of being stalked contributed to her heart problems? More importantly, Marcus had been planning this for a long time. The yard sales weren't random discoveries for him, they were the culmination of months of surveillance and obsession with my mother. I photographed every picture in the note, then drove straight to the police station. This time, I demanded to speak with a detective. Detective Williams listened to my story and examined the evidence with the seriousness it deserved. "This changes everything," she said. "We need to find out who this Marcus really is and what his connection to your mother might have been. Do you still have his contact information?" I realized I'd never gotten Marcus's last name or phone number. He'd always paid in cash and never filled out any contact forms. But I remembered something that might help. He mentioned collecting items with personal history from other estates' sales. Maybe he's done this before with other families. Detective Williams made notes and promised to investigate, but warned me that building a case would take time. "In the meantime, I want you to be extremely careful. Don't hold any more yard sales until we figure out who this person is and what he wants." As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about my mother's final months. She'd been scared, alone, dealing with a stalker while trying to protect me from worry. The guilt was overwhelming, but it was mixed with anger. Marcus had terrorized an elderly woman and somehow managed to turn her death into an opportunity to continue his obsession. That night, I installed motion sensor lights around my property and set up a security camera system. As I was testing the cameras, I noticed movement in the woods behind my house. Through the infrared night vision, I could see a figure standing perfectly still between the trees, watching my house. It was Marcus, and he was holding something in his hands, something that caught the camera's infrared light. It looked like he was taking photographs of me setting up the security system. I called 911, but by the time officers arrived, he was gone. They found footprints in the soft earth behind the tree line and evidence that someone had been standing there for an extended period, compressed grass and cigarette butts. Detective Williams arrived shortly after the patrol officers. "We need to get you somewhere safe tonight," she said after examining the scene. "This behavior is escalating, and we don't know what his endgame is." I spent that night in a hotel, but sleep was impossible. Every sound in the hallway made me jump, every shadow under the door looked like movement. I kept thinking about my mother spending months feeling this same fear, this same helplessness. The next morning, Detective Williams called with news that made everything worse. "We ran the description and behavior pattern through our database. There have been similar incidents in 3 other counties over the past 5 years. Always elderly women, always someone approaching neighbors asking about personal items, always escalating to stalking behavior. In 2 cases, the women died of apparent natural causes within 6 months of the stalking beginning. Are you saying Marcus might have killed my mother? We're looking into it. The pattern is too consistent to ignore. But Sarah, there's something else. In each previous case, after the woman died, the stalking behavior transferred to family members who handled the estate. Daughters, specifically. The implication hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about my mother's belongings. Marcus was now fixated on me. What happened to the other daughters? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. That's what we're trying to find out. One moved out of state and the behavior stopped. The other... Detective Williams paused. She disappeared 6 months after her mother's death. Case is still open. As I sat in that hotel room, staring at my phone, I realized that my weekly yard sales had given Marcus the perfect cover to study me, learn my routine, and plan whatever he was planning next. Every Saturday, I'd been welcoming him into my space, showing him my mother's most personal possessions, giving him exactly what he wanted. But I also realized that he'd made a mistake. Unlike my mother, I wasn't alone in this. I had evidence, police support, and most importantly, I knew what he was capable of. The next Saturday, there would be no yard sale. Instead, Detective Williams and I were going to set a trap. But first, I needed to understand something that had been bothering me since finding my mother's photos. In every picture, Marcus looked like he was searching for something specific. His posture, the way he examined our garbage, The questions he asked neighbors it all suggested he was looking for a particular item. What had my mother hidden that Marcus was so desperate to find? Have you ever had a regular customer or visitor who made you uncomfortable, but you couldn't quite put your finger on why? Sometimes our instincts pick up on warning signs that our conscious minds don't recognize. What's the most unsettling behavior you've noticed from someone who seemed normal on the surface? I never thought my German Shepherd would be the one to expose a dangerous stalker operating at neighborhood yard sales, but what happened that Saturday morning in October still gives me chills. What started as a routine walk through our community's weekend sales turned into a revelation that someone had been systematically targeting vulnerable women for months. My name is Tom, and I've been a retired police officer for 8 years now. After 30 years on the force, I thought I'd seen everything, but civilian life was supposed to be peaceful. My daily routine revolves around my dog, Rex, a 6-year-old German Shepherd who came to me through the K-9 retirement program. Rex had been a narcotics detection dog, but an injury ended his active service career. What I didn't realize was that his training and instincts were about to save someone's life. Every Saturday morning, Rex and I take a long walk through our neighborhood. We live in a quiet suburban area where weekend yard sales are practically a community tradition. Rex enjoys the socialization, and I like checking out tools and military memorabilia. It's a pleasant way to spend a morning, and the exercise keeps both of us active. October 14th started like any other Saturday. The weather was crisp but sunny, perfect for yard sales. Rex and I began our usual route around 8 a.m., stopping at a few sales along Maple Street before heading toward the newer development on Oak Ridge Drive. That's where we encountered Sarah's yard sale for the first time. She had tables set up in her driveway displaying what looked like an elderly woman's belongings: vintage dishes, books, clothing, and household items. Sarah seemed friendly enough when I approached, mentioning that she was clearing out her late mother's house. Rex immediately sat at attention, which was unusual behavior for a social situation. "Beautiful dog," Sarah commented, but she seemed distracted, constantly glancing around as if expecting someone. "Thanks. He's retired police K-9. Still thinks he's on duty sometimes." I was browsing through a box of old tools when Rex suddenly stood up, his ears forward, body tense. He was staring toward the street with the same focused intensity he'd shown during his working years. "Something wrong with your dog?" Sarah asked, noticing Rex's behavior. "He's picking up on something. Rex doesn't go on alert unless there's a reason." I followed his gaze but didn't see anything unusual, just neighbors walking by, a few cars parked along the street, typical Saturday morning activity. Rex remained on alert for several more minutes, occasionally shifting his position but maintaining his focus on something I couldn't identify. Eventually, he relaxed slightly, but he stayed more vigilant than usual for the rest of our visit. I purchased a few items and moved on, but Rex's behavior stuck with me. In his active years, Rex had been one of the department's most reliable dogs. His alerts had led to significant drug busts, and even helped locate missing persons. When Rex went on alert, there was always a reason. The next Saturday, we returned to the same area. Sarah was holding another yard sale, and I noticed she looked more tired, more anxious than the previous week. Rex immediately went into alert mode again, this time more intensely than before. "Is everything all right?" I asked Sarah, noticing her nervousness. She hesitated, then said, "I've been having some trouble with someone watching my house. The police are aware, but..." She shrugged, clearly frustrated. Rex was now moving in a pattern I recognized from his working years, scanning the area methodically, checking sight lines and potential hiding spots. He was conducting a security sweep without being commanded to do so. "Rex seems to think there's someone in the area who shouldn't be here," I told Sarah. "His training doesn't just turn off because he's retired. Would you mind if we stayed a bit longer? Sometimes having a police dog visible can deter unwanted attention." Sarah looked relieved. "Actually, that would be great. I've been feeling like someone's watching me during these sales, but I can never pinpoint where from." Over the next hour, Rex's behavior became more purposeful. He would position himself to watch specific areas, the tree line across the street, a parked sedan about 50 yards away, the space between two houses where someone could stand unobserved. Every 15 minutes or so, he'd shift position, maintaining surveillance of the area. Around 10 a.m., Rex suddenly went into full alert, hackles raised, low growl, every muscle tense. He was staring at a man who had approached the sale while I was distracted talking to another customer. The man was average height, wearing a baseball cap and carrying a messenger bag. He was examining items on Sarah's tables, but something about him had triggered Rex's protective instincts. "Can I help you find something?" Sarah asked the man, but her voice was tight with recognition. "Just looking at these reading glasses," the man replied. "They're very nice. Personal items always have such character." Rex's growl deepened. In his working years, this level of response meant Rex had detected something dangerous: drugs, weapons, or someone with violent intent. I'd learned to trust his judgment completely. "Rex, easy," I said, but I moved closer to Sarah and kept my eyes on the man. "Is there a problem here?" The man looked up, noticed Rex's aggressive posture, and his entire demeanor changed. The polite facade disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "No problem. Just shopping." But he backed away from the tables, away from Sarah. "Actually, I think there might be a problem," I said, letting my voice carry the authority I'd used during my police career. "My dog doesn't react like this unless someone poses a threat. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" The man's eyes darted between Rex, me, and Sarah. "I don't have to answer questions from some retired cop and his dog." That response told me everything I needed to know. How did he know I was retired police? I hadn't mentioned it, and while Rex was obviously a trained dog, plenty of civilians own German shepherds. This man had information about us that he shouldn't have. "You're right, you don't have to answer my questions," I said calmly. "But I'm curious how you knew I was retired police. Have we met before?" The man didn't answer, but Rex's behavior escalated. He was now exhibiting the same response pattern he'd shown when detecting armed suspects, a specific stance and bark sequence that meant immediate danger. "Sarah, please step behind me," I said quietly. To the man I said, "I think it would be best if you moved along." Instead of leaving, the man's hand moved toward his messenger bag. Rex immediately barked, not a warning bark, but the aggressive bark he'd used when suspects were reaching for weapons. "Hands where I can see them." The command came out automatically, decades of training taking over. Several other customers at the sale stopped and stared. The man hesitated, his hands still near his bag. Rex was now in full protection mode, positioning himself between the threat and Sarah, ready to attack if necessary. "Look, I don't want any trouble," the man said, but he didn't move his hand away from the bag. "Then keep your hands visible and back away slowly," I replied. "Sarah, call 911. Tell them we have a suspicious person who may be armed." That's when the man broke. He turned and ran, sprinting down the street toward a parked sedan. Rex started to pursue, but I called him back. Civilian rules were different from police rules, and I couldn't risk Rex getting hurt or me facing legal consequences. The sedan sped away before I could get the license plate number, but I'd gotten a good look at the driver. It was definitely the same person who had triggered Rex's alerts. When the police arrived, I explained the situation to Officer Martinez, who took detailed notes. Sarah provided additional context about her stalking situation, and I shared my observations about Rex's behavior over the past 2 weeks. "Your dog's reactions are consistent with someone carrying weapons or drugs," Officer Martinez noted. "Given the stalking reports, we need to take this seriously." Detective Williams arrived shortly after and interviewed all of us separately. When I described Rex's specific behavior patterns, her expression grew more concerned. "In your professional opinion, what do you think your dog was detecting?" she asked. "Rex was trained to detect narcotics, but his protective responses suggest he sensed someone with violent intent, possibly armed. The way he positioned himself, the escalation pattern, it's exactly how he'd react to a dangerous suspect." Detective Williams made extensive notes. We're going to need you to file a formal statement. This incident, combined with the ongoing stalking investigation, gives us grounds for more serious charges if we can identify this individual." After the police left, Sarah and I talked about what had happened. She was shaken but grateful. "I've been feeling like someone was watching me for weeks, but everyone kept telling me I was being paranoid," she said. "Having Rex confirm that there really was a threat, it's terrifying but also validating." "Trust your instincts," I told her. "And consider canceling these yard sales until this person is caught. Rex's behavior indicates this individual is extremely dangerous." That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the incident. Rex had detected something about that man that my human senses had missed. In his working years, Rex had been remarkably accurate at identifying armed suspects and people with violent criminal histories. His reactions weren't random, they were based on subtle behavioral cues, scent patterns, and threat assessment skills that had been honed through years of training. I decided to do some investigating of my own. Using contacts from my police days, I reached out to Detective Williams with an offer to help with the case. "I'd like to volunteer Rex's services for this investigation," I told her. "If this individual is as dangerous as Rex's behavior suggests, we need to catch him before he escalates further." Detective Williams was interested. "Can your dog track someone from scent evidence?" Rex was cross-trained in tracking before he specialized in narcotics. "If we can get him to the areas where this person has been stalking, he might be able to establish a trail." We arranged to meet the next morning at Sarah's house. Detective Williams had obtained a search warrant for the wooded area behind Sarah's property where the suspect had been observed. When we arrived at the woods, Rex immediately went to work. Within minutes, he'd located the spot where someone had been conducting surveillance: cigarette butts, food wrappers, and impressions in the ground where someone had been sitting for extended periods. But Rex's behavior indicated something more disturbing. He was following a scent trail that led not just to the surveillance spot, but to multiple locations around Sarah's property. Someone had been circling her house, checking windows, and testing access points. "This isn't just stalking," Detective Williams observed. "This is pre-attack reconnaissance." Rex led us to Sarah's basement window, where we found scratches around the frame that hadn't been there before. Someone had been attempting to find ways into the house. "We need to get Sarah into protective custody immediately," Detective Williams said. "And we need to expand this investigation. If this person has been doing reconnaissance on multiple properties, there may be other victims." As we prepared to leave the woods, Rex suddenly went on alert again. He was staring toward the street, ears forward, body tense. In the distance, I could see a sedan parked about 2 blocks away, the same type of car the suspect had used to escape. "He's watching us right now," I realized. "Rex is telling us the suspect is nearby." Detective Williams immediately called for backup while I tried to get a better look at the distant vehicle. Through binoculars, I could see someone in the driver's seat, but they were too far away to identify clearly. Within minutes, patrol cars were converging on the area, but by the time they reached the suspected vehicle's location, it was gone. However, they did find something significant: fresh tire tracks and another pile of cigarette butts, the same brand we'd found at the surveillance site. "This person has been monitoring our investigation," Detective Williams concluded. "They're organized, persistent, and getting bolder. We need to treat this as an active threat to public safety." That night, I researched everything I could find about stalking cases that escalated to violence. The patterns were consistent and terrifying: surveillance, reconnaissance, testing security, then attack. Rex's behavior suggested we were dealing with someone in the final stages of this progression. The next morning, Detective Williams called with news that changed everything. We ran the tire track evidence through our database and got a match. Those tires were involved in a hit-and-run incident 3 counties over 6 months ago. The victim was an elderly woman who had been reporting stalking behavior before she was killed. The implications were staggering. This wasn't Sarah's first victim, it was part of a pattern that had already turned deadly. "There's more," Detective Williams continued. "We contacted law enforcement in the surrounding counties. There have been 4 similar cases over the past 2 years, elderly women reporting stalking, then either dying in apparent accidents, or their daughters being stalked after handling the estates. Rex hadn't just detected a stalker, he detected a serial killer. We're coordinating with multiple agencies now, Detective Williams explained. And we want Rex involved in the investigation. His ability to detect this individual could be crucial to preventing more deaths. As I hung up the phone, I looked at Rex, who was lying peacefully by the fireplace. He had no idea that his instincts had potentially saved multiple lives and exposed a dangerous predator who had been operating across several counties. But I also realized that our involvement had put us directly in the path of someone who had already killed at least once. The sedan watching our investigation meant the killer knew we were getting close. Rex and I were no longer just retired police, we were back in active service, hunting someone who saw murder as a hobby and had been perfecting his technique for years. The question was, would we catch him before he decided we'd become too dangerous to leave alive? Have you ever had a pet that seemed to sense danger before you did? Sometimes animals pick up on threats that we miss completely. What's the most protective or alerting behavior you've seen from a dog or other pet that turned out to be justified? I bought what I thought was a simple neighborhood directory at a yard sale, but what I discovered inside that innocent-looking binder revealed the terrifying scope of a predator's operation that had been targeting our entire community for years. What happened when I opened that directory still makes me question how well we really know what's happening in our own neighborhoods. My name is Janet, and I've lived in the Oak Ridge development for 12 years. I'm a part-time librarian and a dedicated bargain hunter. I love finding unique books and documents at yard sales and estate sales. That Saturday morning in late October, I was making my usual rounds when I stopped at Sarah's yard sale on Maple Street. Sarah seemed friendly but nervous, constantly looking around as if she expected trouble. I was browsing through a box of books when I noticed a thick blue binder tucked between some old photo albums. The cover was unmarked, but it looked like it might contain local historical documents or community records, the kind of thing libraries sometimes discard that can be fascinating to collectors. "How much for the blue binder?" I asked Sarah. She glanced at it and shrugged. "I've never even looked through it. It was in my mother's desk drawer." $5? I paid and took the binder home, planning to examine it later that evening. I had no idea I was carrying home a predator's detailed surveillance manual on our entire neighborhood. That night, I settled into my reading chair with a cup of tea and opened the binder. What I found inside made my blood run cold. The first page was a hand-drawn map of our neighborhood, but this wasn't any ordinary map. Every house was numbered and color-coded. Green houses were marked clear, with notes like, "Male household head," or "Large dog present." Yellow houses were marked monitor, with observations like, "Single female, no security system visible," or "Elderly couple, poor mobility." Red houses were marked target, and had extensive notes about the residents' routines, vulnerabilities, and personal information. My own house was marked yellow, with notes that made me sick. "Single female, works part-time, predictable schedule, no security system, side door accessible from alley, garbage collection reveals prescription medications." But it got worse. Much worse. The next section contained what appeared to be a resident directory, but not the kind you'd get from a homeowners association. This was a predator's database. Each entry included full names and approximate ages, work schedules and typical daily routines, vehicle descriptions and license plate numbers, security system information or lack thereof, pet ownership details, medical information gleaned from prescription bottles and garbage, social media activity and posts about vacations or absences, relationship status and living situations, financial information gathered from discarded mail and documents. The level of detail was horrifying. Someone had been systematically surveilling our entire neighborhood for what appeared to be years. The handwriting was meticulous, the organization methodical. This wasn't random stalking, this was professional-level intelligence gathering. I found entries for people I knew well, including details I'd never shared with anyone. The file on Mrs. Chen across the street noted that she collected vintage linens, lived alone, had arthritis that limited her mobility, and kept a key hidden under her garden gnome. Information about Bob the tool collector included his work schedule at the hardware store, the fact that his wife visited her sister every Thursday evening, and that he kept expensive equipment in an unlocked garage. Then I found the section that made me realize the true scope of what I was looking at. It was titled Acquisition Targets, and contained detailed profiles of elderly women in the neighborhood, along with notes about their belongings, daily routines, and what the author called collection opportunities. One entry was for someone named Eleanor Hartwell on Pine Street. Extensive jewelry collection visible during estate planning discussions overheard at coffee shop. Lives alone since husband's death. Memory issues developing. Housekeeper comes Tuesdays only. No family nearby. Target priority high. Another was for Margaret Foster on Oak Drive. Antique dealer mentioned client has Depression-era glassware collection worth estimated $15,000. Widowed, diabetic, limited mobility. Daughter visits monthly from 2 states away. Security system outdated. Acquisition timeline, 3 to 6 months. With growing horror, I realized I was looking at a hunting manual. Someone had been selecting vulnerable elderly women in our neighborhood, studying their routines, cataloging their valuables, and planning what could only be described as targeted victimization. Then I found the entry that connected everything to Sarah's situation. Eleanor Hartwell deceased, natural causes, March 2023. Daughter Sarah conducting estate sales. Valuable items being sold below market value. Transfer target TO, Sarah Hartwell, same address. Collection opportunity. Ongoing weekly sales provide access and reconnaissance. My hands were shaking as the pieces fell into place. Sarah's mother had been targeted by whoever created this directory. Her death might have been natural, but this predator had been planning to victimize her and had simply transferred his attention to Sarah when the opportunity arose. I flipped to the back of the directory and found the most chilling section yet. Successful acquisitions. It was a log of thefts, break-ins, and what appeared to be instances of elder abuse, organized by date and location. Items stolen, methods used, and notes about whether the victims had reported the crimes. Many entries noted. An old police report, with observations like, victim memory issues, or victim embarrassed/confused. One entry from 8 months ago read, Margaret Foster acquired jewelry collection during medical emergency visit. Subject believed I was paramedic due to uniform. $12,000 estimated value. No report filed. Subject deceased within 48 hours of incident. The implication was horrifying. This person hadn't just been stealing from elderly residents, they'd been impersonating emergency personnel to gain access to homes, potentially contributing to deaths, and targeting people who were too vulnerable to report the crimes. I immediately called 911, but the dispatcher seemed overwhelmed by the complexity of what I was reporting. Ma'am, you're saying you found a book about your neighbors? No, you don't understand. This is a detailed surveillance manual documenting criminal activity across our entire neighborhood. There are records of thefts, identity fraud, and possible elder abuse going back years. Within an hour, Detective Williams arrived at my house with 2 other officers. When I showed them the directory, their expressions changed from skepticism to alarm. This is evidence of a sophisticated criminal operation, Detective Williams said, photographing each page. The level of detail and organization suggests this person has been operating in your neighborhood for years without detection. As we went through the directory together, the scope of the operation became even more apparent. The predator had been using multiple methods to gather information. Following garbage trucks to sort through trash from specific houses. Posing as utility workers to gain access to properties. Eavesdropping on conversations at local businesses. Monitoring social media posts about vacations and absences. Using false identities to attend community meetings and events. Look at this. Detective Williams pointed to a section I'd missed. It was a schedule of regular community activities, book club meetings, church services, exercise classes with notes about which residents attended and when their houses would be empty. This person integrated themselves into your community, she explained. They'd been gathering intelligence at yard sales, community events, anywhere residents gather and share information about their lives. We found evidence that the predator had been using the information to commit multiple types of crimes. Burglary during times when residents were predictably absent. Identity theft using information from discarded mail. Elder fraud by exploiting cognitive vulnerabilities. Insurance fraud by staging accidents for elderly residents with good coverage. Estate fraud by manipulating grieving family members. The yard sale operation was just the latest evolution, Detective Williams realized. Instead of breaking into homes to steal valuables, they realized they could manipulate grieving family members into selling valuable items for a fraction of their worth. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. In the very back of the directory, I found a section titled Future Opportunities that listed residents who hadn't yet been targeted but were being monitored for potential victimization. My name was on that list. Janet Morrison, single female, librarian, predictable schedule, collects valuable books and documents, no security system, side entrance accessible, prescription anxiety medication indicates potential vulnerability to social manipulation. Timeline, 6 to 12 months. The fact that I'd accidentally purchased the predator's own surveillance manual at Sarah's yard sale was either incredible luck or the kind of mistake that indicated the operation was starting to unravel. Detective Williams coordinated an immediate response. Within hours, patrol cars were conducting welfare checks on all the elderly residents identified as targets in the directory. Community liaison officers were notifying residents about the surveillance and providing security recommendations. We're treating this as an active threat to public safety, Detective Williams explained. The person who created this directory is extremely dangerous and has been operating undetected for years. We need to assume they're aware their manual is missing and may escalate their behavior. That evening, Detective Williams called with an update that made the situation even more urgent. We've confirmed criminal activity against at least 12 residents mentioned in the directory. Some victims didn't report crimes because they were embarrassed or confused. Others died before they could report what happened. We're looking at potential charges including elder abuse, fraud, burglary, identity theft, and possibly manslaughter. How did this person operate for so long without being caught? I asked. They were brilliant at victim selection, she replied. They targeted people who were isolated, vulnerable, or unlikely to report crimes. When they did commit obvious crimes like burglary, they made sure the victims were people whose testimony might be questioned due to age or health issues. The next morning, I received a call that changed everything. This is Detective Williams. We need you to come to the station immediately. We've arrested someone in connection with your case, and we need you to identify the directory. At the police station, I was led to an interview room where Detective Williams showed me surveillance footage from a traffic camera near Sarah's house. We got him, she said. The suspect was conducting surveillance on Sarah's house yesterday when our patrol units responded to the welfare checks. He matched the description from previous incidents and was carrying items that connect him to multiple crimes. The man in the footage was average height, wearing a baseball cap and carrying a messenger bag exactly matching the descriptions from Sarah's and Tom's encounters. His real name is Marcus Webb, Detective Williams continued. He's a former insurance investigator who was fired 3 years ago for falsifying reports. He's been using his professional skills to target vulnerable residents across multiple counties. How many victims were there total? We're still investigating, but based on the directory and our evidence, potentially dozens. The operation was much larger than just your neighborhood. We found similar directories for 3 other communities, along with stolen property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The arrest solved the immediate threat, but the psychological impact on our community was profound. Residents who had felt safe in their homes for decades now realized they'd been living under surveillance for years. The trust that makes neighborhoods function had been shattered by someone who exploited that trust for criminal gain. But there was one more revelation that changed how I understood the entire situation. "There's something else you need to know," Detective Williams said. "We found evidence that Webb had been planning to recruit accomplices. The directory you found wasn't just for his own use, it was a training manual he was preparing to share with other criminals." She showed me printouts of online communications where Webb had been advertising his neighborhood intelligence services to other predators, promising to provide detailed surveillance information and victim profiles for a fee. "You didn't just stumble onto one person's criminal operation," she explained. "You discovered what could have become a network of predators targeting elderly and vulnerable residents across multiple communities." The directory I'd bought for $5 at a yard sale had contained enough evidence to prevent what could have been a systematic exploitation network that would have victimized hundreds of people. As I left the police station, I couldn't stop thinking about how close our community had come to a much worse fate. If I hadn't bought that directory, if I hadn't opened it, if I hadn't recognized what I was looking at, Webb might have continued his operation indefinitely and potentially expanded it to include other criminals. But I also realized something that gave me hope. Our community had come together to protect its most vulnerable members. Neighbors were checking on each other, sharing security information, and looking out for suspicious activity. What had been intended to divide and victimize us had instead made us stronger and more connected. The final irony was that Webb's methodical, professional approach to crime, the very thing that made him so dangerous, was also what led to his downfall. His compulsive documentation of his criminal activities provided law enforcement with a comprehensive case that would ensure he spent many years in prison. Sometimes the monsters among us are undone by their own need to catalog their hunting. Have you ever found something at a yard sale or estate sale that seemed innocent but turned out to contain someone's private information? How much do you think your neighbors really know about your daily routine and personal life? It's unsettling to realize how much information we unconsciously share just by living our normal lives. Hashtag the weekly hunter story for the network's web. I thought I was helping my community by creating an online network to coordinate yard sales and estate sales, but what I discovered about how that network was being exploited still makes me question every digital connection we make. What started as an innocent neighborhood organizing tool had become a predator's most sophisticated hunting ground, and I was the one who built it for him. My name is David, and I'm a web developer who moved to the Oak Ridge area about 4 years ago. After attending several community yard sales, I noticed how disorganized everything was: people driving around aimlessly looking for sales, duplicate advertising efforts, missed opportunities for buyers and sellers to connect. Being a tech person, I saw an obvious solution. In early 2022, I created Community Sales Network, a website and mobile app that allowed residents to list their yard sales, estate sales, and garage sales in a centralized location. Users could create profiles, post sale details, upload photos of items, and even coordinate group sales. The platform included a map feature, filtering options, and a messaging system for buyers and sellers to communicate. The response was incredible. Within 6 months, we had over 300 registered users across 5 different neighborhoods. People loved being able to plan their weekend sale routes efficiently, and sellers appreciated the increased foot traffic. Local estate sale companies started using the platform, and we even attracted collectors from neighboring counties. What I didn't realize was that I'd created the perfect tool for Marcus Webb to systematically catalog and target our entire community. The revelation came in November 2022, 2 weeks after Webb's arrest. Detective Williams contacted me because she'd found references to my platform in Webb's seized computers and surveillance materials. "We need to examine your website's user data," she explained during our initial meeting. "The suspect we arrested had been using your platform extensively, and we believe he may have compromised other users' accounts or manipulated the system for surveillance purposes." I was shocked. "Our platform is just for coordinating yard sales. What could he possibly gain from that?" "More than you'd imagine," Detective Williams replied grimly. "We need you to walk us through the system's capabilities and review user activity logs for suspicious patterns." That afternoon, I met Detective Williams and a cybercrime specialist at my home office. As we examined the platform's data, the scope of Webb's exploitation became terrifyingly clear. Webb had created multiple fake accounts under different names, each with carefully constructed personas. Marcus Webb was just one identity. He'd also registered as Mike Wilson, Martin White, and Max Weber, among others. Each account had a slightly different profile focus. Marcus Webb, interested in vintage items and antiques. Mike Wilson, collector of household items and personal effects. Martin White, estate sale professional looking for undervalued items. Max Weber, antique dealer seeking unique pieces. Using these multiple identities, Webb had been able to interact with sellers from different angles, gathering intelligence without raising suspicion about any single account's excessive interest. But the fake accounts were just the beginning. Webb had also exploited the platform's features in ways I'd never anticipated. The messaging system. Webb used private messages to extract detailed information from sellers. He'd pose as a serious collector and ask probing questions about items' provenance, family history, and storage locations. Sellers, excited about potential buyers, would share intimate details about their deceased relatives, family situations, and personal circumstances. Photo analysis. Webb downloaded every photo posted to the platform and used image analysis software to identify valuable items that sellers didn't recognize. He could spot antiques, jewelry, and collectibles that families were unknowingly selling far below market value. Worse, he analyzed background details and photos to assess home security, layouts, and accessibility. Location data. The platform's map feature allowed Webb to identify the exact addresses of all sales. He'd created a geographic database of every participating household, tracking patterns of when families held sales, what types of items they sold, and how frequently they participated. Social network mapping. By analyzing messaging patterns and repeat interactions, Webb had mapped the social connections within our community. He knew which families were friends, which elderly residents had regular visitors, and which households had limited social support. "Show me the account activity for Marcus Webb," Detective Williams requested. As I pulled up Webb's primary account, I was stunned by the level of activity. He'd viewed over 2,000 sale listings in the past year, sent more than 500 private messages, and downloaded thousands of photos. But it was his search patterns that revealed the true purpose of his activity. Webb had been using the platform's search and filter functions to identify specific types of targets. Sales listed by women's names only, indicating potential single female households. Estate sales posted shortly after death notices in local newspapers. Sales featuring items that suggested elderly or vulnerable residents, medical equipment, vintage clothing, outdated electronics. Properties in isolated locations or neighborhoods with limited police presence. "He was using your platform like a hunting catalog," the cybercrime specialist observed. Every listing was potential intelligence about vulnerable households. But the most disturbing discovery was Webb's manipulation of the platform's community features. I'd included a neighbor verification system where longtime residents could vouch for new users to build trust within the community. Webb had systematically befriended established community members, using his fake personas to gain their trust and verification. Mrs. Chen, the vintage linen collector, had verified Mike Wilson as a trustworthy community member. Bob, the tool collector, had vouched for Martin White as a legitimate antique dealer. These endorsements from respected community members gave Webb's fake accounts credibility that allowed him to operate without suspicion. "He was using your platform's own security features against it," Detective Williams explained. "The trust relationships that were supposed to protect users instead gave him legitimacy and access." As we dug deeper into the data, we found evidence that Webb had been planning to expand his operations significantly. In his private notes, found on his seized devices, he'd been developing what he called the network protocol, a systematic method for exploiting community sales platforms across multiple regions. The protocol included 1. Infiltration phase. Create multiple fake accounts with different personas, gain verification from established community members. 2. Intelligence gathering. Use messaging and photo analysis to build comprehensive profiles of potential targets. 3. Network expansion. Identify other regional sales platforms and replicate the process. 4. Recruitment phase. Contact other criminals and offer to sell access to the intelligence database. 5. Operational phase. Coordinate systematic exploitation of identified targets across multiple communities. Webb's seized computers contained evidence that he'd already begun implementing this protocol in 3 other counties, creating fake accounts on similar platforms and building target databases. This wasn't just about our community, I realized with horror. He was building a franchise operation. Detective Williams showed me printouts of online communications where Webb had been advertising his services to other criminals. He'd been offering to provide residential intelligence reports for $500 per household, complete with security assessments, valuable item inventories, and vulnerability profiles. We found evidence that he'd already sold information about 12 households to other criminals, she explained. We're coordinating with law enforcement in other jurisdictions to prevent potential crimes and identify other victims. The scope of Webb's exploitation of my platform was staggering, but there was one more revelation that made me question everything I thought I knew about online community building. Webb hadn't just been a user of the platform, he'd been trying to become a partner. 6 months before his arrest, Webb had approached me through his Martin White persona, offering to invest in expanding the community sales network to other regions. He presented himself as a successful antique dealer who understood the market and wanted to help grow the platform. I'd been considering his proposal, I admitted to Detective Williams. He seemed knowledgeable about the business and had great references from community members. If he hadn't been arrested, I might have made him a business partner. The thought that I'd almost given Webb legitimate access to expand his predatory network to other communities was nauseating. He'd been planning to use my platform as the foundation for a criminal enterprise that could have victimized thousands of families across multiple states. But there was a silver lining to this digital nightmare. The comprehensive data Webb had accumulated through the platform became crucial evidence for law enforcement. His obsessive record-keeping through your platform gave us everything we needed to build an airtight case, Detective Williams explained. Every message, every search, every photo download created a digital trail that documented his criminal intent and planning. The platform's data also allowed law enforcement to identify and warn potential victims before they could be targeted. Every household Webb had researched through the platform received security consultations and warnings about potential threats. In the months following Webb's arrest, I worked with law enforcement and cybersecurity experts to completely rebuild the community sales network with enhanced security features. Identity verification systems that required government ID and local address confirmation. AI monitoring for suspicious search patterns and message content. Automatic alerts for law enforcement when predatory behavior patterns were detected. Enhanced privacy controls that limited access to personal information. Community reporting systems for suspicious user behavior. But the experience fundamentally changed how I thought about technology and community building. Every feature that made the platform useful for legitimate community building, the social connections, the detailed information sharing, the trust systems, could also be exploited by predators. The internet amplifies both good and bad human intentions. The cybercrime specialist had told me during our investigation. Platforms that build community can just as easily be used to exploit community. A year later, the rebuilt community sales network continues to serve our area, but with much stronger protections. We've partnered with local law enforcement to provide ongoing monitoring, and we share our security protocols with other community platforms to help prevent similar exploitation. Webb was sentenced to 15 years in prison for multiple charges including elder abuse, fraud, burglary, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit organized crime. The evidence from the platform was crucial in connecting him to crimes across 4 counties and preventing the expansion of his criminal network. But the case also revealed how vulnerable our digital communities can be to systematic exploitation. Webb's operation succeeded for so long because he understood that people want to trust their neighbors and communities. He exploited our desire to help each other and share our lives in service of criminal predation. The community sales network still operates today, helping hundreds of families coordinate yard sales and estate sales safely. But every user now receives education about protecting their personal information and recognizing predatory behavior. The platform includes resources about home security, identity protection, and how to report suspicious activity. What started as a simple tool to help neighbors coordinate yard sales had become a case study in how technology can be weaponized against the communities it's meant to serve. But it also demonstrated how those same digital tools, when properly secured and monitored, can be powerful instruments for protecting vulnerable community members and bringing criminals to justice. The most important lesson I learned is that building community online requires the same vigilance as building community offline. Predators will always look for ways to exploit human connections, whether those connections happen on front porches or through fiber optic cables. But communities that stay alert, support each other, and use technology thoughtfully can be stronger than any individual threat. Webb's network failed because our community's network was ultimately more powerful than his. Have you ever participated in online community groups or platforms? How much personal information do you think you've shared without realizing it could be used maliciously? The convenience of digital community building comes with risks that we're still learning to understand and manage. What steps do you think online communities should take to protect their members while still fostering genuine connections? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.